$27,000. Are you insane? That's what I shouted at the professional woman on my porch with her briefcase of legal documents. She claimed I owed HOA back dues since 1974 when I was 3 years old. I just bought this lakefront mansion 3 months ago with a clear title and full inspection. But this HOA lady insisted I owed money before I could even walk. My dream home was becoming my worst nightmare, and I had no idea how deep this would go. Let me tell you about myself first. I'm 45 and have been running an antique shop called Timeless Treasures downtown for 12 years now. After my divorce 3 years back, I'd been living in this cramped apartment above the shop, dreaming about owning something real, something with space to breathe. I'd been hunting for lakefront property for 8 months straight. And let me tell you, it was brutal out there. Every weekend, I'd drive around looking at overpriced dumps or dealing with pushy realtors who acted like they were doing me a favor just by showing me places. My budget was $280,000 max, and in this market, good luck finding anything decent for that price. I got outbid on 3 decent homes, and I was starting to think maybe apartment living wasn't so bad after all. Then my realtor, Sarah, called with something different. "Adam, I've got a property you need to see. It's unusual." The way she said unusual made my stomach drop. In real estate speak, unusual usually means run for your life. But I was desperate, so I agreed to take a look. What I found was this gorgeous mansion, 3,200 square feet, built in 1924, sitting on 1.2 acres of prime lakefront. The price? $265,000. I literally laughed when Sarah told me, "What's wrong with it?" I asked. Because nothing that beautiful comes at that price without serious problems. Sarah explained it was an estate sale. The previous owner, Eleanor Blackwood, had died at 89 with no family. The estate executor wanted a quick sale, and here's where it got interesting. They were only offering a quitclaim deed. No warranty deed available. That should have been my first red flag, but honestly, I was already falling in love with the place. Sarah walked me through all the risks. No title insurance guarantee, potential liens, easement issues, the whole nightmare scenario. There was an HOA here back in the 70s and 80s, she mentioned casually, but it dissolved due to mismanagement. County records show no active HOA entities. The way she said it like it was no big deal should have made me more nervous. But I was too busy imagining myself drinking coffee on that wraparound porch, watching the sunrise over the lake. Walking through the house, I could see Eleanor had taken incredible care of it. Original hardwood floors that gleamed like mirrors, hand-carved moldings that probably cost more than my car, and every room felt like stepping back in time to when people actually cared about craftsmanship. "This house has good bones," I told Sarah, running my hand along the banister. Eleanor knew what she was doing. The estate executor smiled when I said that, like I'd passed some kind of test. The title search revealed what they called a cloud on the deed from the old dissolved HOA, but the title insurance company cleared it without much fuss. "Dissolved entities can't hold liens," their lawyer assured me. Everything seemed legitimate, just complicated enough to scare off other buyers. Perfect for someone like me who wasn't afraid of a little paperwork headache. Closing day was January 15th. I remember sitting in that stuffy lawyer's office signing what felt like 100 documents, my hand cramping from all the signatures. When the estate executor handed me the keys, he also gave me a handwritten note from Eleanor. "To the buyer, may you find what I could not finish." Strange thing to say, but I figured it was just an old lady's sentiment about someone else living in her beloved home. Moving in was surreal. I spent that first weekend loading my antique furniture into rooms that actually had space for everything. Setting up my home office in what used to be Eleanor's study, planning out the restoration timeline. I had about $15,000 saved up for improvements, exterior paint, deck repair, some basement waterproofing, and updating the electrical. Nothing major, just bringing everything up to modern standards while respecting the house's character. But you know what they say about best-laid plans. 3 weeks into living there, I made a discovery in the basement that changed everything. Eleanor hadn't just left me a house, she'd left me a mystery. And mysteries, as I was about to learn, have a way of finding you, whether you're looking for them or not. I found Eleanor's basement office completely untouched by the estate sale. Her desk still had coffee rings on it, reading glasses folded neatly on top of engineering drawings. But what really caught my attention was the surveying equipment. Professional-grade stuff worth thousands of dollars. Transit level, steel measuring stakes, engineering compass, and blueprint tools. Everything marked EB Property Survey 1985. Why would an old lady need surveying equipment? And why did the estate leave it behind? But the real kicker was sitting right there on the corner of her desk, a heavy lockbox with a handwritten label that made my blood run cold. For the next owner only. That lockbox haunted me for days. I'd pick it up, shake it, hear something faintly rattle inside, but the lock was solid brass and clearly custom-made. I tried every key I had. Nothing fit. I thought about taking it to a locksmith, but something about that handwritten note made me hesitate. It felt like Eleanor wanted me to earn whatever was inside. On the fourth night, curiosity won. I grabbed my Dremel tool from the garage and carefully cut around the lock. Inside was a folder of yellowed documents, some photographs, and what looked like a ledger. The first photo I pulled out was a black and white shot of the house taken from the lake, with the words Blackwood HOA 1978 written on the back. There were at least 20 people in the photo, all smiling, all standing in front of a wooden sign that said Lakewood Preservation Society. I didn't recognize any of them except one face near the center, Eleanor herself, much younger, holding a binder. The next document was titled HOA Covenant Amendments, 1974-1986. I started reading, but halfway down the page, something made my stomach twist. One clause read, "All properties under the Lakewood HOA shall remain subject to annual dues in perpetuity, regardless of dissolution, until officially revoked by a recorded county action." The signature at the bottom, Eleanor Blackwood, HOA Treasurer. That's when it hit me. This old HOA might not be as dissolved as everyone thought. Maybe Eleanor had been trying to fix something she helped create. I called Sarah immediately. "You told me this HOA doesn't exist anymore," I said, trying to keep calm. "It doesn't," she replied. "County records show it inactive since 1989. I told her about the covenant, the photos, the lockbox. She went silent for a long time, then finally said, "Adam, whatever you do, don't ignore that. You might want to talk to a real estate attorney." The next day, I did just that. My lawyer, Frank Miller, looked like he'd seen it all. Gray hair, rolled up sleeves, voice like gravel. He scanned the documents, leaning back in his chair. "Well, this is unusual," he muttered. "If this covenant was never officially revoked, technically the HOA's right to collect dues could still exist on paper." "But it was dissolved," I said. "Eleanor herself said that." He shrugged. "Dissolved is one thing. Legally terminated is another. There's a difference." I drove home that night feeling uneasy, the kind of feeling that settles deep in your gut and refuses to leave. The next morning was when she showed up, the same woman from the HOA who'd claimed I owed back dues. Her name was Linda Pierce, acting president of the reconstituted Lakewood HOA, as she put it. She had paperwork showing the HOA had been reactivated by surviving members 2 years ago, claiming authority over all original lots, including mine. When I told her that was impossible, she smiled politely and handed me a certified letter. Inside was an invoice. Outstanding dues since 1974, $27,000. I laughed out loud. "You're joking, right?" "No," she said calmly. "We have legal right to collect under the perpetuity clause. You can appeal within 30 days. I tore up the paper right in front of her. "Good luck collecting on a dead covenant." Her expression didn't change, but before leaving, she said something that still echoes in my head. "You're not the first owner who thought that." That night I couldn't sleep. The house that had once felt like a dream now felt like it was watching me. I kept thinking about Eleanor's note. "May you find what I could not finish." What if she'd been fighting them too? What if this HOA wasn't just some neighborhood committee, but something darker, something that refused to die? The next morning, I went back down to the basement, determined to learn more. I pulled out the rest of the documents from the lockbox. There were minutes from meetings dated as late as 2003, long after the HOA was supposedly inactive. Every meeting note was signed by the same name, Eleanor B., and in the last few pages, scrawled in shaky handwriting, she'd written, "They won't let go." "They still come to the lake at night. If anyone finds this, be careful who you trust." I stared at that last line for what felt like hours. "They won't let go." They still come to the lake at night. My hands trembled slightly as I set the page down. The air in the basement felt thicker, colder. For the first time since I bought the place, I didn't feel alone down there. I shut the lights and climbed the stairs fast, forcing myself not to look back. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Eleanor had meant. Who were they, and what did she mean by still come to the lake? Around midnight, I stepped outside onto the back deck. The lake was calm, the moon casting a silver shimmer across the water. Then I saw them. Two faint lights moving slowly near the opposite shore like flashlights sweeping the ground. I froze. There were no other houses close enough for someone to be out there at that hour. The hair on my neck stood straight up. I turned off my porch light and watched quietly. The beams of light moved in a strange pattern, almost like someone was marking spots or pacing in a grid. I couldn't see faces, just shadows. After about 5 minutes, the lights went out completely. I stayed out there another half hour, listening to the water lapping against the dock. Nothing. Just silence. The next morning, I tried convincing myself it was just some kids or night fishermen, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something about the way those lights moved, precise, deliberate, didn't feel random. I decided to dig deeper. If Eleanor had left clues, I was going to find them. I spent the entire day searching the basement, checking drawers, old filing cabinets, even behind loose panels. Around 3 p.m., I found a false back in one of the bookcases. Behind it was a small envelope sealed with brittle wax. Inside was an old Polaroid photo. Eleanor standing next to 3 men in business suits, one of them holding a blueprint. On the back of the photo, written in fading ink, were the words, Parcel 19 Boundary Dispute. 1985, that rang a bell. The property survey equipment in the corner of the basement had labels reading Parcel 19. I pulled out the survey maps, spreading them across the floor. According to the drawings, the boundaries of this house extended 15 feet farther into the lake than what the county currently listed. And in that 15-foot strip, marked with red pencil, were the letters RW Restricted Waterline. It didn't make sense. Why would an HOA care about waterline boundaries? I took photos of the documents and drove to the county recorder's office. The clerk, an older man named Harris, was helpful but cautious. When I mentioned Lakewood HOA, his eyebrows lifted. Haven't heard that name in a while, he said, tapping the keyboard. Let's see. Looks like there was a reactivation filing 2 years ago. Limited membership, though, only 6 properties listed. I leaned closer. Is mine one of them? He nodded slowly. Lot 47 Lakefront parcel? That's yours. My stomach dropped. Who filed the paperwork? He scanned the document, then frowned. Linda Pierce and... Hold on, that's odd. A trust signed by E. Blackwood. I blinked. What? Eleanor Blackwood? She's dead. Yeah, he said quietly. Filed posthumously through a legal proxy. I walked out of that office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. How could a dead woman sign to reactivate an HOA? That night, I barely ate. I sat at my desk rereading Eleanor's notes, trying to piece together what she'd been doing before she died. Every page hinted at the same obsession. Something about the lake boundaries, a lost document, and references to the Founder's Clause. Around 10 p.m., I decided to check her old study on the second floor, the one room I hadn't really gone through yet. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. In the corner, an antique roll-top desk sat locked. The key was nowhere to be found. I remembered the old lockbox. Maybe one of those smaller keys would fit. After some fumbling, one did. Inside the desk were letters, dozens of them, neatly tied with twine. Most were addressed to Eleanor from someone named Charles Pierce. My pulse quickened. Same last name as the HOA woman. The earliest letters dated back to 1979, the most recent to 2002. I opened one from the middle. Eleanor, the board can't hold forever. If the water line is proven to belong to the trust, we lose jurisdiction. They'll erase everything. Don't let them bury the covenant. You're the only one who can keep it alive. I set the letter down, stunned. The Pierces and the Blackwoods hadn't been enemies. They'd been allies once. But something must have gone wrong. I skimmed through more letters, each one more desperate than the last. Then, near the bottom of the pile, I found one unlike the rest. It wasn't written to Eleanor, It was from her. Charles, I can't protect it anymore. They know I've been altering the records. The lake belongs to no one now. If they come again, I won't answer. The next owner will have to finish it. I felt my chest tighten. That line, the next owner will have to finish it. She'd meant me. My mind was spinning. Finish what? Restore the HOA? Expose it? I didn't even know who they were. The following afternoon, I drove into town and met Sarah for coffee. I told her everything. The lockbox, the covenant, the letters. She listened without interrupting, her face growing paler by the minute. When I mentioned the name Charles Pierce, she nearly dropped her cup. Linda's husband, she whispered. He drowned in this lake in 2003. My heart skipped. You're sure? She nodded. It was ruled accidental. He was the last president of the original HOA. The room seemed to tilt slightly. So Eleanor and Charles were working together, and then he dies. And now Linda's back to collect dues? Sarah didn't answer. She just said softly, Be careful, Adam. There are families around here who still think the HOA owns everything. That evening, I decided to confront Linda. I drove to the address on her letterhead, a colonial-style house about 10 minutes from the lake. She opened the door before I even knocked, as if she'd been expecting me. Adam, she said coolly, I wondered when you'd come. Cut the games, I snapped. Why are you harassing me over debts from before I was born? And why is your husband's signature on county files dated 2 years ago? Her eyes narrowed. You've been digging. You're damn right I have. For a moment, her mask slipped, a flash of anger or fear I couldn't tell. Then she smiled. You really think you understand what you've bought? I stepped closer. I know you forged Eleanor's documents. Forged? She laughed softly. No, Mr. Turner, preserved. Someone had to. She lost her nerve. The covenant must survive. Survive for what? I asked. She leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. For the water rights. That lake isn't public. It never was. It's ours. And you're living on it. My mind reeled. You can't own a lake. We can, she said. And we do. The founders wrote it that way. Everything within the original easement, including your dock, your shoreline, all subject to the HOA. I laughed bitterly. So this is about money? No, she said coldly. It's about control. Before I could respond, she shut the door. I drove home shaking, anger and fear twisting in my chest. If what she said was true, my property might be part of a decades-old power grab disguised as a neighborhood association. When I got back, it was almost midnight. The house was dark except for a faint light coming from the basement window. I froze. I hadn't left any lights on. Slowly, I walked inside, heart pounding, and crept down the stairs. The desk lamp was on, papers scattered everywhere. But what stopped me cold was the wet footprint on the concrete floor, leading away from the desk toward the back door that opened to the lake. The lock was undone. I stepped outside, scanning the yard. The moonlight shimmered on the water, calm and silent, until a ripple disturbed the surface near the dock. Something metallic glinted under the water, then disappeared. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down to the edge. Kneeling, I noticed something embedded in the mud, a rusted metal plate, maybe 6 inches wide, with the letters HOA 19 engraved on it. My breath caught. Parcel 19. I tried prying it loose, but it was cemented into something larger beneath. The water was freezing, but I waded in anyway, tugging until the ground gave way slightly. That's when I saw it. A faint outline of a submerged concrete structure extending from the shoreline straight into the lake. It looked like a foundation wall, maybe 20 feet long, covered in moss and mud. Why would there be a wall under the lake? I backed out, shivering, my clothes soaked. As I climbed the bank, I noticed movement near the tree line, a silhouette watching me. I raised the flashlight, but the figure stepped back and vanished into the dark. I didn't sleep that night. Around 3 a.m., I heard a splash outside, faint but distinct. Then came a low hum, like an old boat engine starting up. I looked out the window, but the lake was pitch black. No lights, no movement, just that humming sound fading slowly into the distance. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. If this HOA wanted a fight, I'd give them one. I gathered every document, every letter, every photo, and drove straight to my lawyer. Frank looked over the pile, his expression hardening with every page. "This isn't just an HOA dispute," he said finally. "This is property fraud on a historic scale. They're using a dead woman's trust to claim modern assets." He paused. "But you'll need proof that the covenant was terminated, not just dissolved." "And if it wasn't?" I asked. He sighed. "Then technically they might have a case, but I doubt any judge would uphold something this old. Still, tread carefully. People get weird when money and land mix. When I got back home, there was an envelope wedged in my doorframe. No stamp, no name, just my A. I read that note 3 times, every muscle in my body tense. "Stop digging or you'll end up like Charles." The letters were uneven, the ink smudged like someone had written it in a rush. For the first time since all this began, I actually locked every door and window in the house. I even pulled the curtains shut in the living room and sat there with a cup of cold coffee waiting for daylight. The silence felt heavier than usual, pressing in from all sides. When morning finally came, the first thing I did was call my lawyer, but Frank wasn't answering. Straight to voicemail. That's when I decided to stop playing defense. If they wanted me scared, fine, but I wasn't going anywhere until I knew exactly what they were hiding beneath that lake. I drove to the county archives, this time requesting the original Lakewood development plans from the 1920s. The clerk hesitated, but finally brought out a massive binder wrapped in plastic. Inside were blueprints, signatures, and a single stamped clause. Founders' Covenant, to preserve the integrity of submerged structures and ensure private stewardship of the Lakewood waterline. My stomach flipped. Submerged structures. They weren't talking about docks. Someone had built something under that water almost a century ago, and somehow the HOA had inherited the right to control it. Eleanor must have discovered the same thing when she did her surveys. No wonder she'd been afraid. That evening, I returned to the house with a new plan. I brought my old waterproof flashlight, a crowbar, and a bit of adrenaline-fueled stupidity. The sun dipped below the trees as I waded into the water near the concrete slab I'd seen before. It didn't take long to find the edge again. I started scraping away moss, chipping at the mud until the light caught something metallic beneath. An iron hatch with a small circular handle, nearly sealed shut by years of decay. I yanked, twisted, cursed under my breath until finally it cracked open with a groan that echoed across the lake. Cold, stale air rushed out from the darkness below. A tunnel under the lake. Every instinct screamed to stop, but curiosity won. I lowered myself inside, feet splashing into shallow water. The passage was only about 6 feet high, lined with crumbling concrete and rusted pipes. I followed it for maybe 40 feet before it opened into a chamber lit by faint daylight filtering through a vent above. In the center of the room stood a metal cylinder about the size of a car engine, surrounded by rusted valves and cables leading upward, toward the lake. Painted on its side were the words, "Lakewood Power Reserve, 1924. I realized, heart pounding, that this wasn't just a house feature. It was an early hydroelectric generator, built decades before any modern grid connected here. The HOA wasn't originally a homeowners group at all. It was a consortium of local families that owned and maintained this private energy source. Control of the lake meant control of power, literal power. As I took photos, something echoed behind me. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, splashing closer. I spun around, flashlight trembling. A silhouette filled the tunnel entrance. "Should have left it alone," a woman's voice said. Linda. She was holding a pistol, her face half hidden by shadow. "Eleanor tried to destroy the covenant," she continued, stepping forward. "But I won't let her work go to waste." I backed toward the wall, the beam of my flashlight catching her face. She looked older than I'd realized, the years carved deep around her eyes. "Why?" I asked. "Why keep this secret?" "It's ancient history." She shook her head. "This generator still feeds our grid. We sell power to the county under a private contract. If the world finds out it's on your property, we lose everything." Her voice broke slightly. "This lake is our legacy." Before she could step closer, a deep rumble echoed through the tunnel. Water began seeping faster through cracks in the wall. I realized the hatch must have weakened the structure. "Linda, we have to get out now!" She hesitated, glancing at the generator. For one frozen second, I thought she'd stay. Then she turned and ran. We scrambled up the tunnel as the floor shook beneath us. When we reached the hatch, I pushed her out first, climbing after her just as the chamber collapsed with a deafening roar. A plume of muddy water shot into the air, the lake surface churning violently. We stumbled onto the shore, soaked and gasping, watching as bubbles and debris surfaced where the tunnel entrance had been. Linda stared at the water, speechless. "It's gone," she whispered. I didn't answer. Part of me felt relief. Another part knew something bigger had just been erased. The generator, the evidence, maybe the last piece of truth about this entire mess. By the time we reached the road, Linda turned to me. "I'll make sure you're left alone now," she said quietly. "No more letters. No more dues." Then she walked away without looking back. A week later, the county declared a minor sinkhole at the edge of the lake and fenced it off. No one mentioned underground tunnels or secret generators. The HOA paperwork vanished from public record, as if it had never existed. Frank finally called. He'd been out of town, but when I explained what happened, he only sighed. "Some fights end themselves," he said. "Be glad you're still standing." I wanted to believe him. But each night after that, I'd stand on my porch watching the water, half expecting to see those faint lights again. For a while, nothing happened. Then, one foggy morning, just as the sun broke through, I noticed something glinting near the dock. I walked down and found a small brass plate washed up on the shore. It read, "To the next owner, thank you for finishing it." I stared at it for a long time before pocketing it. The lake was calm again, peaceful almost, but I knew better now. Some legacies aren't written in deeds or titles. They're buried in mud, waiting for someone foolish enough to dig them up. I turned back toward the house, the morning light catching on the old wood and glass. It looked different somehow, less haunted, maybe even grateful. I don't know if Eleanor finally found her peace, but I sure found mine. And if anyone ever shows up claiming I owe them back dues from 1974 again, I'll hand them the plate and say, "You're too late. It's already paid in full."